welcome. You are watching Gravitas with me, Mughal-E-Azam. Here's a look at what's lined up for you on the show tonight. Our cover story tonight is about a move that comes with far-reaching implications. It's a development which has a lot of consequences attached with it. A US House panel wants India to be a part of the NATO Plus grouping. Now, what exactly is behind the move? What really is brewing behind the scenes? And also, ahead of the Indian Prime Minister's state visit to Washington, D.C. next month, a question that is surfacing is, will the Indian Prime Minister seal a deal to buy the American F-16 jets? We decode this and more over the next few minutes. Also on the show for you tonight, China's Wuhan virus nightmare is turning uglier. We tell you what the latest situation is looking like and whether China's new COVID-19 wave should worry you. We also tell you all about the Indian Army's Grand Theaterization push and why it's significant. We know cockroaches can be scary, but are they scary enough to trigger a terror alert and panic? We tell you what happened in Israel. A woman in China gets paid to be a full-time daughter. What exactly is this concept all about and why is it gaining popularity? In 2020, the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi reinforced the Indian Air Force's strike capacity with Rafales from France. Will he seal a deal for the highly prized F-16 warplanes during his state visit to Washington in the third week of June? Will India get not only the latest in combat aircraft, but also the technology for domestic production as he strengthens India's defense capability against the twin threats of China and Pakistan? I'm asking this because of what happened over the weekend. It seems that the stage is being set for a major upgrade in India's strategic relations with the United States of America. A powerful congressional committee in the US recommended that India be included in NATO Plus. First things first, what is NATO Plus? Well, it's a security arrangement. And who is a part of it? NATO Plus 5 being Australia, New Zealand, Japan, Israel and South Korea. This grouping is aimed at boosting global defense cooperation, and this will be a major change in India's long-standing policy in defense procurement. For India has politely resisted all previous efforts to include it in the NATO embrace, even if this is an extended NATO embrace. And here's what joining NATO Plus will mean really. Number one, seamless intelligence sharing. Number two, access to the latest military technology without time lag. Americans like to call F-16 the world's most active fighter jet. These are single-engine, multi-role fighter jets. They can be used in air-to-air combats, even in air-to-ground strikes. Each jet can cost up to $63 million, depending on the model. America has used the F-16 in Afghanistan, Iraq, Kosovo. Thousands of F-16s have been exported as well. And here are some of the countries that have these jets: Turkey, Israel, Egypt, South Korea, Greece, Belgium, Poland, Denmark, the Netherlands. And America has also exported the F-16s to Taiwan. And as I speak, F-16s are in the news courtesy Ukraine's nagging demand for them. We've been telling you about this. Ukraine believes these jets can be a game changer. Now the question is, if the F-16s are really that capable, why hasn't India bought them yet? I'm guessing a lot of you have the same question. India has not bought these jets because of the baggage that they come with, simply put. You see, American laws governing sensitive technology limit the capability of the F-16. I don't know if you know this, but the US does not share full control of the fighter jets it exports. For example, the US can remotely turn off or disable certain systems. So there are riders that American defense technologies come with. Now, could India joining the NATO Plus, if that happens, change this? And does India need American technology in this case, the F-16? The Indian Air Force requires 42 squadrons of fighter jets. Currently, there are 31. In the year 2019, the Indian Air Force said it would be spending up to $15 billion to buy 114 fighter jets. In the year 2020, the then Chief of the Defense Staff, late General Bipin Rawat, said the Air Force would be ordering indigenous jets instead of spending the money on foreign jets. But Air Chief Marshal R.K.S. Bhadauria, who was then the head of Indian Air Force, said that there was still place for foreign fighter jets, that India wants both indigenous and foreign jets. And cut to Aero India 2023, India's Grand Aero Show. You had a US Air Force F-16 flying past on day 2. Many in the Indian media saw it as America trying to get India to look towards its defense industry while making the next big purchase. You see, in the early 2000s, India had floated a $10 billion plus contract for 126 multi-role combat aircraft. America had hoped to land that contract. Instead, India went with France's Dassault. It's another story that the contract was later withdrawn and New Delhi instead decided to purchase 36 Rafales under a government-to-government contract. The first batch of the Rafales entered the Indian skies in July 2020, and over the next 2 years, all the remaining jets were delivered. But India needs more fighters, especially given the security situation in the neighborhood, which brings us back to the question, could India finally be buying the F-16s from America? Well, there is already a talk of creating a coordinate response against China. You know, if Beijing attacks Taiwan, India, of course, will not join the combat militarily, perhaps economically, and come to think of it, a lot of the recent developments are pointing towards the possibility of such a future. Let me point out a headline. 14 countries, including India, the US, Japan, Australia, Indonesia, and Malaysia, have announced, quote-unquote, substantial conclusion of negotiations on supply chain agreement under IPEF, or the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership. Now, this bloc, remember, aims to reduce dependence on China. Now, while all of this is all nice and fair, here is the big question that the possibility of India joining NATO Plus comes with. What really happens to India's strategic autonomy? This question is nagging some of the best minds in our defense establishment, like General V.P. Malik, hero of the Kargil War, who told WION that the nuclear issue could come up, and there is no guarantee on how much autonomy India could have over its nuclear weapons or the command of its own military, given that a lot of NATO countries are not happy with what he called the dominance of the United States. But other experts have equally strongly said that joining NATO Plus will not compromise India's strategic autonomy, because India will not be under any military compulsion to join any NATO military action. And coming back to the F-16s, we can be sure of one thing. The threat from China needs to be met by the best equipment in the world. And in the air, F-16s are the gold standard. And as America discusses the inclusion of India in the NATO Plus, thousands of miles away in Belarus, another deal is in the making. What kind of a deal? A deal proposed by the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko himself. You know what he said? That nations that side with Russia in its war with Ukraine will be given nuclear weapons. I'm not making this up. Have a look at the report on your screen. The man is offering nukes to anyone who supports his friend Vladimir Putin. But will he find any takers is the question. Over the next few minutes, we discuss this and more. Let me start with the statement. During an interview last week, Lukashenko said, and I'm quoting, "No one is against Kazakhstan and other countries having the same close relations that we have with the Russian Federation. If someone is worried, it is very simple. Join in the union state of Belarus and Russia. That's all. There will be nuclear weapons for everyone." Now, what exactly should we make of this? Did Lukashenko say this of his own volition or after consulting his friend Vladimir Putin? Well, his office says that this is just his own view and not the view of Russia. And what's worse, the country he used as an example says it really does not want any nukes. I'm talking about Kazakhstan. The country's president has said, and I'm quoting, "I appreciated his joke. As for nuclear weapons, we do not need them because we have joined the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. We remain committed to our obligations under those international documents." Not just that, he further said that Kazakhstan was already a member of a broader Russian-led trade bloc along with the Eurasian Economic Union, so no further integration was necessary for the country. Simply put, Kazakhstan has denied the offer. But you see, the timing of Lukashenko's statement is still very interesting. It came just a day after Moscow and Minsk confirmed that they are about to begin transferring some tactical nuclear weapons. On the 26th of May, the two sides signed a deal formalizing the deployment of tactical nukes on Belarusian territories, although control of the weapons remains with the Kremlin. And when will these weapons be deployed? Now, this has not been announced yet. And where will the weapons be deployed? No answers on this one as well. And how many nukes will be kept in Belarus? Again, no answers. All we have really is a statement from the Belarusian defense minister justifying the need for such an agreement. Let me now quote his exact statement. "Deployment of non-strategic nuclear weapons is an effective response to the aggressive policy of countries unfriendly to us in the context of an extremely sharp escalation of threats on the western borders of Russia and Belarus. A decision was made to take countermeasures in the military nuclear sphere." And this deal has drawn the ire of many in the West. The US State Department has called it an example of irresponsible behavior. The EU, for that matter, has called it an extremely dangerous escalation. Ukraine has called it the murder of global nuclear deterrence. The Belarusian president could not care less, though. Not only is he praising the deal, but also offering nukes to anyone who joins them. And this is striking, but hardly surprising. Remember, Russia and Belarus are formally part of a union state, a borderless union and alliance between the two former Soviet republics. In fact, Russia used Belarus as a launchpad, remember, for its invasion of their common neighbor, Ukraine. And since then, their military cooperation has only intensified, with the two conducting joint training exercises on Belarusian soil. That said, despite this recent move into Belarus, experts say that Russia remains unlikely to use its nuclear arsenal. In fact, they say Putin has a habit of making such threats without any intention of following through in order to break the Western resolve. He just loves the idea of the Western leaders believing that he might. He is many things, but he's not suicidal. And as for Lukashenko, he has a reputation of being a loose cannon. Throughout the war, he has said things without really meaning them. So when he offers to provide nukes to countries willing to support Moscow, one cannot help but view that with skepticism. And from Russia, let's shift focus to China. As I speak, it's battling an old enemy with a new name, the Wuhan virus and its new XBB subvariant. It's making more and more people fall sick. That's right, according to reports, despite the spike in infections, China appears determined to press on with normal life. The national leadership has in fact refused imposing curbs and restrictions. Instead, the entire focus right now is on reigniting economic growth. The question is, how many cases is China reporting? No one really knows. The situation is frankly very difficult to grasp at this point because China has stopped releasing domestic infection data after April. But a Bloomberg report says the new wave could lead to 40 million weekly cases by the end of May and 65 million weekly cases by the end of June. I repeat, 65 million. But despite these concerning numbers, zero COVID is not making a comeback. And this is very unusual, by the way. Until late last year, China was ready to lock down entire neighborhoods in a bid to stamp out what were sometimes just small clusters of COVID-19 cases. And that's not happening this time. The question is why? And the answer is China's economy. For weeks now, financial markets have been raising red flags about China's economy. And that is because the post-COVID rebound has largely failed to pan out. Retail sales, home sales, industrial production, fixed asset investments, they have all slowed down. And what's worse, the Chinese currency is tanking. Earlier this month, the yuan fell past 7 per dollar threshold. This happened for the first time this year. Even the price of copper, for that matter, which was once expected to see sizable gains due to high demand from the Chinese factories, hit a 4-month low in mid-May. Chinese equity markets are not immune to slowing performance either, of course. Reports say the CSI 300 index continued to slip this week. Just to put this simply, China's economy is in a mess, and imposing a lockdown right now will likely deal a death blow to it. And this is why Chinese authorities are resisting. But are they really right in doing that? I'm asking this question given China's track record. Every time there has been a COVID-19 wave in the country, it has spilled over to the rest of the world. And this has happened, by the way, despite zero COVID, despite the restrictions that China placed on its people. Yet, even after that, it could not stop the virus from breaching its borders. So what's the guarantee? This will not happen again. We will not see a repeat. Data released by the Civil Aviation Administration of China shows that domestic passenger air travel recovered to pre-pandemic levels in April 2023. That month, the industry transported a total of 50,275 million passengers, a year-on-year increase of 537.9%. And the same report also stating that earlier this month, the U.S. Department of Transport issued an order stating that it has increased the number of round-trip flights between the U.S. and China. Earlier, there were 8 flights per week. The department increased the number to 12. My point is simple. The Wuhan virus is back in China. Lockdowns are not being imposed. Flights are still operational. Are we to believe the rest of the world will be immune to what's unfolding there? Are we to believe that this subvariant will not really infect international tourists? The earlier we ask these questions, the better our chances of safeguarding ourselves will be. Moving on for now, we've been telling you about the climate activists, their protests, the ones who put charcoal in fountains and splashed tomato soup on historic paintings. A similar incident has been making news, but it's not the activists this time. A patch of fluorescent green water popped up in Venice's Grand Canal. Who did this? What caused it? As of now, no environmental group has claimed responsibility. So how could a green blob suddenly appear in this iconic canal? Our next report telling you all that you need to know.
What's happened to the famous Grand Canal of Venice? How has it turned bright green? Is it algae? Is this a prank? Is this another form of protest by climate activists? Venetian authorities are wondering the same. Believe it or not, nobody knows the origin of the green swath of water. Is this green fluid toxic? The regional environmental agency gathered samples of the water. It said that the substance was not harmful. Officials suspect that the substance could be fluorescent, a powder dye that can easily be diluted in water. Authorities have accused climate activists based on several attacks on Italian heritage sites in recent months. Reports say activists have denied any involvement. Lined up with historical places and churches, the famed Grand Canal is a major waterway. This means it is often jammed with tourists. The water discoloration could prove a blow to the tourists, especially near Rialto Bridge, where the water first started to turn green. The bridge is known as the emblem of Renaissance-era construction. You see, this is not the first time the canal has experienced a color alteration. In 1968, the waters turned green when Argentine artist Nicolas Garcia Uriburu released fluorescein in the canal. This happened during the Venice Biennale, an international theater festival. You can call Uriburu the climate activist of his time. He wanted to bring people's attention to ecological issues. The green color was supposed to show the relationship of nature and civilization. Climate activists have carried this trend to present day. A wave of disruptive actions have swept across Europe, including Italy. Earlier this month, a climate action group invaded Rome's famous Trevi Fountain. They poured charcoal into the water to protest the use of fossil fuels. What the group describes as civil disobedience actions includes spraying paint on historical buildings and throwing soup on a Van Gogh painting. The Grand Canal incident comes amid the Vogalonga boat event, which is meant to spread attention for the environment and nature. We are back to the question, who colored the canal green? No one knows.
Our next story is from India, where a major step is being taken towards the integration of officers from the defense forces. It's called cross-staffing, and with its implementation, army officers will be stationed in the Air Force as well as the Indian Navy. This step is a prerequisite for achieving theaterization of the armed forces. It is a step to build theater commands. What exactly is a theater command? It is a command system that intends to bring better synergy between the three branches of the defense forces, that is the Indian Navy, the Indian Army, and the Indian Air Force. Cross-staffing is a step to build these theater commands. And for cross-staffing to be taking place, A batch of around 40 Army officers will soon be posted to the Indian Air Force and Navy establishments. And these officers will perform similar roles to the one that they performed in the Indian Army. Further, Army officers who are a part of the cross-staffing postings will be at the executive levels. Their ranks will be that of a major and a lieutenant colonel. And with this, a corresponding number of officers from the Indian Air Force and the Navy are also likely to be posted to Army establishments. You must be wondering, how is this possible? How can three different areas of defense facilitate a cross-transfer? How exactly does this work out? Well, that's because several weapon systems, surveillance radars, vehicles, telecommunication equipment are common across the three services. And that's where these cross-staff postings will be taking place. The cross-staffed officers will likely be tasked with handling logistics, reconnaissance, repair and recovery, as well as supplies management during their non-native postings. And the main purpose behind cross-staffing really is to pave the way for greater synergy and integration among the services, which in turn will help in overcoming various challenges of reporting procedures, procurement, and supply chain disruptions. And the end goal of cross-staffing is to familiarize the officers with the ethos and the functioning of the other two forces so that they can carry out operations in an integrated manner. Theatre commands function by responding to threats that a country faces in the neighborhood. In fact, it promotes prompt intel sharing, improved troop acclimatization. It is compact and cohesive in nature and facilitates speedy mobilization. In India, the task of establishing theatre commands has been given to the Chief of Defence Staff. And apart from India, several countries, including the US and China, have theatre commands. And this is, of course, not the first time that India is aiming to integrate the services. Recently, remember, India announced a common uniform for officers of the rank of brigadier and above with its implementation from August 2023. The new uniform will have common items away from an officer's regimental or corps affiliation to promote a great deal of esprit de corps, or what is commonly known as group spirit. They say that in union there is strength. And India is rightly doing this by making a solid attempt at integrating the services of the country. And as we move on to our next story, I want you to look at some reports. This is the World Press Freedom Index for 2023. It was released by Reporters Without Borders. It ranks India at 161st position, lower than the likes of Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. Now look at this one. This is this year's Academic Freedom Index. It was released by VDEM Institute on a scale of 0 to 1. India's score is 0.38, even lower than Bhutan and Pakistan. There's another one. This year's Freedom in the World Index gives India a score of 66 out of 100. It places India in the partially free category. It is, by the way, the same status that India had when the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi imposed emergency in the country. How is the freedom that Indians enjoy today comparable to that period? And the same report, by the way, gives Northern Cyprus a score of 77. It categorizes the territory as a free democracy. But in truth, Northern Cyprus is only recognized by Turkey. No other country, not even the United Nations, recognizes it as a sovereign state. How is this justified? And there's more. This is the Global Hunger Index for 2022. India ranking 107, lower than Bangladesh, lower than Pakistan, which was pounded by massive floods in the same year, and even lower than Sri Lanka, that faced its worst economic and political crisis. Do you see something here? I'm of course not trying to show India in a bad light, far from it. I am trying to highlight just how these indices have been targeting India, trying to portray India in a bad light. The figures and the rankings just don't seem to add up. They are compiled by a group of think tanks in the North Atlantic, sponsored by a handful of funding agencies and sold to the whole world like concrete facts. For the most part, they are agenda-driven and neo-colonial. And India has decided to push back now. The Cabinet Secretariat has taken up the matter. In fact, it has held over a dozen of meetings and workshops, even set up index monitoring cells. Over the last year, it has found several flaws in the way these indices are put together. You heard that right. Even global institutions like the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the United Nations Development Program have gaps in their methodologies. They are not as sacrosanct as you are led to believe. As I told you, most of these opinions come from Western think tanks. They are the perceptions of only a few experts. But the World Bank picks them up. It puts them into the World Governance Index, and the ratings then get hardwired into decision making. They dictate how the rest of the world perceives India and ultimately affect the economy. You see, the indices are not just for narrative building. They have clear and direct impact on trade, investment, and other growth activities of India. Bad ratings and low rankings raise questions on India's economic and political stability. And all this based on what really? Western institutions provide their expertise, but they do not provide any transparency on how the experts were chosen, what qualifies them to have a say in the matter. Their nationality is never disclosed, and yet global institutions simply take their word for it. It's not just me who is saying this. India's economic advisors have raised similar concerns. So what really is the way out? First of all, these institutions should offer more transparency. The likes of the World Bank, World Economic Forum should exercise greater scrutiny. While perception-based indices should not be ignored, they should be taken with a pinch of salt. Secondly, experts say independent Indian think tanks should also compile similar reports for the world. It would not only break the monopoly of the Western institutions, but also put forth the Indian perspective. As far as other indices are concerned, India is bracing up for them and will be watching them closely. We all have squirmed in fear when a cockroach has come too close to our liking, haven't we? From going pale to tiptoeing around to avoid another face-off with the insect. Our response may have ranged from flight to fight. But most certainly, we've all been there. Something similar happened to a woman from Israel. You see, she was sitting at a cafe, enjoying her food, and just then, she spotted a cockroach. And what happened next is anything but funny. People thought it was a terrorist attack. People were enjoying food and music, but suddenly they started overturning tables in the fear of a terrorist attack. Widespread chaos followed. 2 people sustained injuries. Glasses were shattered. People fell on the glass. They caught cut injuries. They started bolting to the exits, and police units were sent to the cafe to sweep for suspects. A little too much for spotting a cockroach, is it not? And on reaching the site, the police did not find any terrorist operatives. Instead, they found that it was a woman who screamed, and her screaming actually led to all this chaos. Though the screaming was in response to the sight of a cockroach, the pressing issue here, of course, is not the cockroach, but it's the fear that people currently are living with. The psychology of terror that has become, unfortunately, a part of daily lives of the people of Israel. The thing is, Israelis are facing a persistent level of alert following a spate of terror attacks this year, attacks that killed many and left several wounded. Tel Aviv, where this incident took place, is a beautiful city on Israel's Mediterranean coast, but it has been the site of several terrorist attacks. And these attacks include a deadly shooting in the month of March, during which a terrorist opened fire outside a cafe, leaving behind numerous fatalities. In fact, tracing slightly back in time, last April, a terrorist opened fire at patrons. This was at a bar, again in Tel Aviv. Many lives were lost, many were injured. You see the point here. If this is what an evening at a cafe in Israel looks like, what else do you expect out of people who hear a sudden scream? Isn't it too normal a reaction then? Israel is not only home to the common cockroach, but also has some of its large flying species. They are known to spark a deep fight or flight response in the people, with cockroach attacks on one hand, terrorist attacks on the other, and both of these instilling a constant state of fear. One can only imagine the plight of the Israelis. Let's now shift focus to India. The country's space agency, ISRO, or the Indian Space Research Organization, has made a remarkable achievement. It has successfully launched and put into orbit a navigation satellite. The satellite NBS-01 is the first of the second-generation satellites intended for the navigation with Indian constellation, or NAVIC services. What exactly is navigation with Indian constellation all about? Well, it is a regional navigation satellite system working in tandem with the ground stations. Basically, this system came into being because of the needs of the civil aviation sector. What kind of needs? Better positioning, navigation, and also timing. In fact, as per the Indian Space Agency, NAVIC is useful for civil and strategic applications. It offers two services: Standard Position Service, SPS, for civilian users, and Restricted Service, or RS, for the strategic users. In fact, some of the applications include terrestrial, aerial and maritime navigation, also precision agriculture, location-based services in mobile devices and marine fisheries, so on and so forth. And this launch means continuity of the NAVIC services, or the navigation with Indian constellation services. And you know why this is significant? These will be an Indian alternative to the global positioning systems, or GPS. Basically, a system similar to GPS, providing accurate and real-time navigation in India and a region extending to 1,500 kilometers around the mainland. There are 4 global satellite-based navigation systems, by the way: the American GPS, the Russian GLONASS, the European Galileo, and the Chinese Beidou. Japan has a 4-satellite system that can augment GPS signals across the country. And this, by the way, is yet another crucial year for the Indian Space Agency. There are a number of ambitious projects lined up. ISRO, in fact, is gearing up to launch one of the biggest missions of this year, the Chandrayaan-3. Now, you might have heard about stay-at-home dads. But have you heard about full-time daughters? Is it a new concept for you? Then let me introduce you now to a 40-year-old Chinese woman. Her name is Neanan. For 15 long years, she worked at a news agency, but it ultimately took a toll on her mental health. Work was taking over her life. She was constantly on calls, busy with work meetings, crippled by the stress. And that's when her parents stepped in. Why don't you just quit your job? They proposed. And they allowed her and offered her an allowance of 4,000 yuan, as in $565. As amusing as it may sound, Nyanan actually took up the offer. She left her job to become a full-time daughter. She describes her job as a profession filled with love. Let's just have a look at what her average working day looks like. The mornings are energy-filled. She spends an hour dancing with her parents, and then she accompanies them for grocery shopping. In the evenings, she cooks dinner along with her father. Nyanan also takes responsibility for all electronic-related matters. She works as their driver, organizes 1 or 2 family trips every month. She says being with her parents is relaxing, but there's still the desire of earning more. The pleasure that money brings, but also the pressure is a concern. Her parents constantly reassure Nyanan that she can switch to other jobs when she finds a promising offer. Now, this full-time daughter concept is more prevalent in China than you think. It is an alternative for youngsters who face intense competition and the hustle of 996. You heard that right. In China, they don't have the common 9-to-5 jobs. They have 996 instead. That is, the employees grind away from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in office for 6 days a week. And amid this, the Chinese are looking for job alternatives. And being a full-time daughter is one such prospect. Another one is becoming a digital nomad. A digital nomad is someone who works remotely and can choose which country to settle in and for how long. And then we also have fake significant others. As you may already know, Chinese culture is built around strong familial ties. It is considered odd if a young adult attends a holiday without a significant other. Women in particular are under immense pressure to get married young. So career-oriented women often hire a stand-in boyfriend for family functions and dodge unnecessary questions from intrusive relatives. There are even professional beggars in China. You heard that right. Many have discovered they can make more money begging than working. And others are embracing the 5 lifestyle, which means they can be financially independent and voluntarily employed. You see, these options let the Chinese break free from traditional work constraints. It gives them greater autonomy in their career. However, these forms of modern lifestyle are not for everyone. Just take the concept of a full-time daughter, for example. While some have welcomed, even praised it, others have condemned it as simply being a parasite on the parents. They call it Ken Lao in Chinese, dubbed Eat the Old. Full-time children actually comes from the term full-time housewives. Homemakers do not enjoy a salary, but full-time daughters are indeed getting paid. What do you think about this concept? Would you be open to such a career switch? On that note, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas Tonight. We are leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
可是它胃里面每天吃的东西。Hold on. I'll take my top handle out.
So when you look at these now we're coming out the other side.